My name is Nicole Gonzalez Van Cleve, and I'm an associate professor here at Brown University. And we are so happy to have what is a series of two panels. Today, we are going to talk a little bit about the decision to go and get that PhD. I know I'm a first generation college graduate. And so for me, the idea of getting a PhD was something that was totally foreign. I really had no idea exactly how my professors became professors. And it wasn't until I had a wonderful mentor that said, "Are you thinking about getting a PhD?" And I said, "No, I'm going to go to law school," because that's kind of the only thing that I had thought about. I thought maybe going to law school would be great. I never thought about actually studying lawyers and the law and criminal justice and all the things that I've been exploring through my career and scholarship so far. So it's really lovely to host this panel today to bring you all into this world of academia and those of you who are considering a PhD. We are going to talk to two amazing scholars, and Professor Josh Pasevich is going to come in at the end and really help us out with the Q&A. We've already gotten an enormous amount of questions for the people that signed up, so we're really excited to kind of dig in deep into those questions. Our panel is going to last about 15 minutes to an hour or so. We're going to aim for 15 minutes. That way we have a lot of room and space for questions, and really any question is really fair game. As you know, for me, there were things as simple as I didn't know PhD programs were funded, fully funded. I thought, wow, getting paid to go to school. Now that was a novel idea, something that never occurred to me. So we really want to make this a space where you feel like you can share your questions. So without further ado, I want to introduce our panelists today. So our first panelist is Ananda Martin Cowley. She's an assistant professor of sociology at Brown University. She received her PhD from New York University in 2023 and previously worked for the U.S. Census Bureau and the Urban Institute. Her research centers on stratification, work and organizations, gender, and race. She's particularly interested in how work is changing and the implications for inequality, gender, and racial stratification. Her research also has been funded by the National Science Foundation, the Russell Sage Foundation, and the Washington Center for Equitable Growth. And we are just overjoyed to have her in our faculty. She's one of our newer members of the faculty, and we thought it was wonderful to have her here to talk about that transition. You know, it's so fresh in her mind, the time in which she was applying to graduate school or thinking about it, and now she's here as a professor and a wonderful colleague. Our second panelist today is Jonathan Acosta. And Jonathan is a postdoctoral research associate at the Annenberg Institute at Brown University. A trained sociologist, his research uses mixed methods to study migrant incorporation in post-industrial cities across the American Northwest. His current work looks at the economic and geographic mobility of first and second generation migrants living in pan-ethnic post-industrial cities. In a pan-ethnic post-industrial city. His work has been published in the Sociology of Development. But before beginning his doctoral research, Acosta, as he's affectionately known in our department or around Brown, was a K through 12 middle school math teacher and administrator. And I'm sure he will talk a little bit more about that those career moments before he decided to get that PhD. He holds a recent PhD. We just gave him his doctorate. He defended his doctorate very recently. He has that PhD in sociology from our department here at Brown. He's got an MA in sociology and an MA in urban education and policy. And one of the most interesting things is that in his spare time, he is a state senator for Rhode Island District 16, representing Central Falls and Pawtucket. So I would love to just welcome our two panelists here, and congratulations, Dr. Acosta.
Thank you, Doc. Thanks for having us. Looking
Right,
forward to
Ananda,
this conversation.
the novelty never wears off, right? For like that first year or so, people will call you doctor. You're like, who, me? Does that me?
Yeah, it
Um,
doesn't feel real.
exactly. So if you don't mind, I'll maybe go by first names here. We'll be a little less formal. So I want to talk a little bit first. Let's start with Ananda. Did you know that you wanted to get a PhD and be a professor? And when did that idea come to you?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I just want to start off by saying, like, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. I think this is so awesome. I had a lot of privilege when I was applying for PhD programs. There were people in my family who could help me. There were people I worked with who had PhDs. And so, I am excited about the opportunity to make this information more widely available so that more people can feel comfortable and have the information that they need to make this decision. In terms of when I first thought about getting a PhD, in college, I really enjoyed doing research. So through some of my classes, I got to do little mini research projects, and then I ended up writing a senior thesis towards the end of college, and just really enjoyed that process of finding my own data and interviewing people and running my own regressions and all of that. So I had a little bit of experience with that in college and just was excited about the idea of having a research-oriented career. I never thought I wanted to become a professor necessarily, but I knew I liked research. And so it was in the couple of jobs that I had out after college where I was doing research as sort of like a research analyst level. That's when I started to meet people who had recently gotten PhDs or were planning to get PhDs. And then it was like you sort of learn through your social networks what that looks like and the potential benefits, the potential downsides. So I think for me, when I sort of decided to get my PhD was when I was in my second job out of college. I was working at a think tank called the Urban Institute, and a lot of people around me had PhDs, and I realized it would be a great way to further my research career.
Great. So Acosta, I want to ask you just a little different spin. So, you were kind of the triple threat getting all your degrees here at Brown. Did you have a special mentor or was there another journey for you to just even think about the possibility of getting that PhD and becoming a professor?
Sure. So I also want to thank you, Doc, for having us on and for doing this for the people who have joined us. And I'll say that so I am both first generation American. My parents are both Colombians. They migrated here in their youth, and I'm the first person on my mom's side of the family born in the U.S. And I'm a first generation college student. So my parents had no idea kind of how this world worked. And I myself, when I got to college, didn't know what a PhD was. I thought college professors were glorified teachers, to be honest with you. And it was having the opportunity to go to Brown as an undergrad in the 2000s, where through the liberal education program, I was able to take classes in these different departments. And so the two folks very early on, Trisha Rose, who's still at Brown, Ralph Rodriguez, who's also still at Brown, they were teaching classes on these topics that one were very interesting to me, but two, so Trisha taught a class on hip hop music and culture. She was the first person to write a dissertation on hip hop in academia, and Ralph taught classes on Latino literature, and he had a class, Color Me Cool, on graphic novels, and it was just mind blowing to me that you could get paid to read, write, and teach about the things that were interesting to you. I mean, that just seemed so beautiful, so compelling, so attractive as a career path, and I was like, I have to figure out how you would do this, and kind of like you mentioned law school. I was getting to a kind of fork in the road at the end of my undergraduate studies, and the year before my senior year, the summer before my senior year in college, I had an opportunity to either do an internship at the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute or an undergraduate research assistant position with Kay Warren, who was an anthropologist. She helped found the Women's Studies Department at Princeton. She came over to Brown and was the director of the Watson. And she just really pitched the beauty of research of what this career could be. She had me over to her house and had me for dinner. And Kay is really my mom. To this day calls her my academic madrina. She kind of took me under her wing. She gave me my first experience doing field work, and it's where I really fell in love and decided that this is what I want to do for the rest of my life.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think it's always funny that I remember thinking the same thing about there's a career where you can actually research the things that you like. I remember it just sounded crazy to me. I'm like, where's that boondoggle? How is that possible? Now, of course, we're going to talk about some of the hardships and the struggles and things like that. It's not all, the yellow brick road, but I think even just that idea that you could have some kind of vision for your research and kind of move your research. I mean, that also felt really special to me. It wasn't I don't know if you felt this way, Ananda, at the Urban Institute. Did you get to pick your research or did your research often pick you as an assignment?
Yeah, great question. So The Urban Institute is a policy research organization in DC, also called a think tank. And there's quite a few of those in the DC area and also around the country. And the way that those organizations work is, entry-level staff, so usually have a bachelor's degree, they're assigned to existing projects. And so you can definitely give some input about which topics you're really interested in. And I came in with an interest in education and work. And so I was placed on projects in that general area. But yeah, I was really, working on projects that other people had conceived of. And it was a great experience and I had a fantastic time there. But yeah, I was excited to, as I furthered my career, be the one who's kind of deciding what are we going to research, what are the topics that matter to me and that I think matter to the world, and to be able to pursue those myself was really exciting. And yeah, I also was, I always enjoyed going to school, and the idea that I could continue going to school and not take on debt was very exciting to me too. And yes, we'll talk about the pros and cons.
Yeah, and the finances too.
And the financials.
Yeah. So I'm going to share this. I'm going to share just a quick misconception I had about grad school, but I want to hear about yours. One is when I left an advertising job when I started my PhD, and my colleagues were like lovingly gave me the things I needed. And one was this like gorgeous notebook. It was like hardcover, and it was like, and a beautiful pen. And they imagined me like sitting in coffee shops for hours. Maybe if I had like a patch on my arms, like the blazers with patches on it. I mean, they had this like mythical idea of what graduate school was going to be like. So I'm curious, maybe I'll go to Costa on this one. Did you have any misconceptions about about the PhD and what it would entail?
I think going in, one of the misconceptions I had was that it would be very structured. And I will say, given my conversations with colleagues in other institutions and such, I think there's variation in that from department to department, right? Like there are some places where it's more common that you come in to join a particular kind of research team or somebody's initiative, even as a student. So as soon as you come in and do your coursework, you're really focusing on a project that's pre-existing or trying to find your spot within an existing project. And then there are other places, I would say our department is a little bit more unstructured in that regard, where you can really kind of find your own thing. And so I expected to kind of come in and join a larger PI's, research program or study, and that wasn't really the case. It was way more kind of build your own, and that was I think some of us struggled a little bit with that, and others were like kind of took to it more.
Yeah. What about you, Ananda? Because I went to Northwestern, and so it was a little bit very similar to Brown in that we each came in with a lot of ideas about what we wanted to pursue. And if you didn't have those ideas, there were mentors and faculty, but also, your cohort mates that could kind of help you find that direction. What was it like for you?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that there was a lot more freedom right off the bat than I anticipated. So yes, I had some required classes, but they were relatively few. And I was very quickly able to take electives across the university, able to do independent studies, able to kind of start working on projects as an RA very quickly. And so I think that's a really good thing, and can also be challenging at the beginning because, there's so many different ways that you can develop this adventure. So I would agree that I thought that, there might be more requirements, a bit more structure with like figuring out the initial projects that I would be working on. I think another misconception I had was I underestimated how long it takes to do academic research. And so, I didn't really know going into it just how big a dissertation is and how it really like does take years to kind of figure out what you're doing, the appropriate methods, gather the data, analyze it. Like the whole process took longer than I anticipated.
Right. And I think to that point, I think I imagined it being like accelerated undergrad, like, meaning they would tell me a lot of truths about sociology. I don't think I realized that I'd be thinking about questions and thinking about pathways to answer those questions. I was like, oh, I get to steer that ship. So it was a little different. Like I thought they would people would be stowing knowledge on me and I would passively be like taking notes on what they said, rather than what you're both describing is creation, right? Like we're creating scholarly questions and answers. What about this idea too about the workload and the balance of, you both have wonderful career experience before you started, and we'll get to that, how long to apply. But what was the workload that's shifting into being kind of a professional scholar in training for you? How did that work for you both? Let's start with the cost on that one.
Sure. I mean, I think it was a benefit to have been in the workforce for a few years. I was out of undergrad for 6 years before I went back. I also did a master's in urban ed policy, and I think that gave me an opportunity to think about school as work, right? So treating going to school as a job. Now, I don't think that's a prerequisite. I think there are folks who go straight through that can handle that very well. I was a little bit of a I enjoyed my undergraduate experience, and I think I would have struggled a bit in the transition to going right into graduate work. And so when I did start, though, I tried to kind of give myself the kind of bounds that I had in a kind of 9 to 5 Monday through Friday job, and that wasn't enough. I mean, there was a lot more hours that you had to put in on the weekends, particularly in those first 2 years where the reading workload is the heaviest, I would say. So there is a lot of reading in PhD programs. A lot of times people will say like this is the most you'll probably ever read in your life, even after, right? Because you just like your job at that point is just to read and digest all the information that they're throwing at you. And so I was very intentional about saying, I'm going to work these hours to these hours, setting boundaries even with my own family. So I would often be caught at like holidays and stuff reading in the corner because I wanted to make sure like I got through that 927th page of Black Reconstruction, right? It's just a massive book. It takes so long to get through. But so I think treating this as a job, understanding that like this is your job now. It's not, you're not doing anything for anybody but yourself. So whether you read something or not, like you're gonna either have that information or have that context or background knowledge, or you won't after you walk away from that class. I think was a real mindset that I wanted to go in with, and that having worked or been in the workforce for a few years helped me do more effectively.
Yeah. And I think it feels really special when you realize, oh wow, I'm cultivating my own knowledge bank for me and my research. Like that's a really, excellent point. It feels like a shift. Ananda, how about you? How did you transition that workload mindset, like becoming a professional scholar in training?
Yeah, similar to Acosta, I also wasn't ready, don't think I would have been ready to go in straight out of undergrad, although I definitely think people do that successfully. And I was grateful to have had the experience of a 9 to 5 for 3 years before I started my PhD program. So I really did try to maintain a similar schedule of working Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, sometimes a little bit longer. I actually feel like I was able to preserve my weekends and evenings for the most part. I mean, maybe to the detriment to some of my understanding of the readings in depth, but it was important to me to have balance in graduate school. And I feel like I was able to maintain that for the most part, not at all times and all years, but I think like, starting off the beginning of the day, like, trying to learn how to read better, that was something that I kind of developed as a skill in grad school. I think in undergrad, I didn't have those skills, but figuring out how do I read efficiently? How do I pull out the most important information? How do I engage with this text productively? And so I feel like I was able to maintain a good amount of balance in grad school. Although it is stressful at the beginning when you have so many classes and you're also taking stats and you're reading, all this like dense theory, and so it's just kind of a lot of new information plus socializing with your new friends and cohort mates. So it definitely was busy, but I think it's possible to have balance too.
Yeah, that's true. And I know Acosta was teaching wrestling and doing other things outside of the PhD that were, and Acosta, you did that when you were getting your PhD, right? That was something that you continued. I actually continued a passion for teaching figure skating and mentoring students in the Chicago Park District. Anand, did you have any like things from your former life that really just kind of kept you grounded and happy and joyful while you were in all the stress?
Yeah, I mean, went to grad school at NYU, so I was like discovering New York and being in a new place and just going on long walks and making friends. And so I think for me, like a lot of it was just like the excitement of getting to know a new place and getting to spend time with people there. And then yeah, I tried to maintain my hobbies of I really like running and also trying to read for pleasure. That one took a bit of a hit when you have so much reading to do for school, but that was something I tried to keep up as well.
Great. So this is a quick question, and then we'll go into the finances. How long did each one of you wait to go into your PhD program, and did you have any strategy behind that? I'll start with, I waited 5 years, and so I felt like I was an old woman, but that was crazy because I was not an old woman going into a PhD program. I was in my late 20s. So how about you, Ananda? How many years did you take off between undergraduate and your enrolling in your PhD program?
Yeah, for me, it was 3 years. I decided I wanted to do the PhD after about a year and a half of being out of undergrad. So I could have applied a year earlier than I did, but I decided to give myself an extra year to kind of like figure out where I wanted to apply, learn what was going on, make some more money before that. And so I wanted to have the work experience, but then I also, wanted to, once I decided I wanted to do the PhD, I also felt like, let's just do this sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. Yeah. What about you, Acosta? I don't remember. How many years did you take off? Was there, or did you go straight through? I don't remember.
No, well, so I like telling the stories of failure alongside the stories of success. So one thing to acknowledge is mine didn't go exactly as planned. So I was a Teach for America core member right out of college. So I taught in Dade County, Miami-Dade County, where I was born for 2 years. And the plan was to go from that right to grad school. And because I had gone to Brown undergrad and had a little bit of that snob in me, I only applied to like 5 of the top 6 programs. I'll leave out which one I didn't apply to, but I just say there weren't a lot of Latinos in that area, and I just wanted to go there back then. But so I got waitlisted from 4. I got rejected from 4 off the bat, waitlisted at 1, actually NYU. They flew me up to their visit day. It was so nice. And then they called me a week later. They were like, sorry, we don't have a spot for you. So I felt pretty hard on my face
Yeah.
and needed to think about, moving forward. So at that point, and this is where having mentors is so helpful, I kind of regrouped, reached back out to some of the folks who had helped me prepare materials for that and went back into the field, did research for more years with Kay, kept moving along my education career, and eventually applied again 4 years later after I had gotten another master's degree. And I know you guys are going to have another session on the kind of the successful application process. But at that time, one of the pieces was also the GRE, so getting that right where it needed to be was something that I spent the next kind of 3 years packaging, so that in the 4th year I'd be able to go back.
Yeah. I love that because, we don't talk about that for many people. It is a competitive process to get into a graduate program, a PhD program, and it segues nicely with my next question. But I think that it's important to know that, getting quote unquote rejected 1 year, it's very different from, I think, an undergraduate program where, you feel like, okay, if I got rejected, it's not gonna happen again. And I think that persistence is probably one of the best lessons, is that most academics have to have thick skin, get rejected from journals and you submit a journal, or rejected from a grant or a fellowship or the program itself or a job. You just have to keep pushing forward, which is so important. So our next panel, which Acosta has kind of mentioned, is we're going to talk a little about like the insider's guide to applying to graduate school. So that look for the marketing that's coming on that. So we won't go too deep into it, but we talked a little bit about finances, and Ananda, you said like you waited a little bit and you were saving money and those types of things. Did you all have a good sense of the finances of applying for a PhD? Meaning, once you're accepted, like, how do you pay for this? What does it mean? Ananda, tell us a little about that for you.
Yeah, I learned a lot about this from a former coworker who was going through the process like a year before I was. And so I learned a lot from her about like what kinds of stipends are provided. The fact, that I think I knew that you didn't have to pay for it, but I didn't know like what kind of stipend you got. To what extent is it related to teaching while you're in the program? If you get your own funding through like a separate grant or something like that, how does that fit in? So she helped me figure out some of that. And then, all of the PhD programs do it a little bit differently. So once I had applied and gotten into a few places, then it was like trying to figure out, okay, which one is going to make sense for me financially, plus all the other considerations. Did I answer your question?
Absolutely. And
Okay.
Acosta, go ahead. Tell me your
Yeah,
now.
so
It
you
sounds
know,
like you had great mentorship too, talking to you. Whole
yeah,
thing.
so
Yeah.
actually going back to that, I met with Trisha, Trisha Rose, who had mentioned before, in between applying. And I remember her sitting me down and she said something to the effect of like, listen, if you ever pay to go to school, I will find you, knock on your door, and smack the shit out of you. Right. Like she was like, listen, from now on, once you finish this undergraduate degree, you will only get paid to go to school. And so even in the master's that I did, I did not pay for that, and I had taken their word very seriously. I was like, the only way I'm going to pursue any future degree or any future credential is if it's paid for. And in the PhD's case, if they pay you to do it. So when it came to that, for me, it was much more about kind of planning some of the other pieces of my life, right? And so because I did TFA, there was some AmeriCorps money to help pay down some of my college loans. As I was developing my career as an educator, I made sure to be very financially responsible. I did not come from a very stable financial background. I actually mentioned this to my partner the other day because I want to mention it here. I also was very clear, though, as I was going into adulthood with my family, that I was not going to be um, very responsible for their finances. So I was transitioning to try to be independent, and I know that not everybody has that freedom or is able to do that in the same way. I have colleagues, friends who do have to support their family financially. And I was very clear with kind of all sides of my family that like from now on, like I need to focus on me. So that meant paying down some of my debt. That also meant saving money and having some coins set aside for when I would transition to the graduate program, getting my car note paid for, right? So like I wanted to have as little month to month financial obligation as possible so that I can make this transition smoother. And without being too crude, I like to drink whiskey. And one of the things that because I had been kind of raised broke that I think I'm able to do better than some other people is adjust my lifestyle accordingly, right? And so when I was a school administrator, I was drinking Jack Daniels. As I was preparing to go to graduate school, I started drinking Jim Beam. And when I first started the graduate program, I drank Evan Williams because that's what you can afford on that, on that pay scale. And so one day I'll work my way back up to maybe a blue label or something like that. But doing that with all facets of your life, how often you're eating out, what kind of bills and stuff that you're taking on, I think was very important for me to kind of plan as I was going into graduate school.
Acosta, I always love your down to earth examples. Always stay real. I love it. But one thing I want to step back, and if I get this wrong, both Ananda and Acosta, please correct me. When I was applying, we used to think there used to be tiers of funding. There'd be some schools that would pay your tuition, but give you zero financial support and a stipend. Then there'd be that someone else who would get a tuition plus maybe 2 years of a stipend, tuition plus 3, tuition plus 5. And so it created like this needs hierarchy. One of the great trends that I'm seeing, and I know here at Brown we do, and actually I don't want to brag too much, but I think we have the highest or one of the highest stipends of all the top schools in the nation for sociology, is that everybody accepted gets the same financial package. There is no hierarchy of who's getting funding, the haves and the have-nots of the same cohort. And I don't know if that was similar, Ananda, for you. I felt like at Northwestern at the time I enrolled, that was a very new thing. Does that sound, I'm imagining students there wondering if, what exactly is the financial situation. Does that sound accurate? I just wanted to make sure we get that out there.
Yeah. So at NYU, everyone received like the same basic stipend. And then there was some variation based on, did you have like some grant or award or something like that that could supplement, but everyone got I think it was 5 years of funding. So a lot of people got a 1-year extension for COVID. And I would say that, just to echo Acosta's point earlier, like, I would be very skeptical about PhD programs that aren't paying you a stipend. I think the good programs will be giving you a stipend in addition to covering your tuition. And it's, that's what allows you to get through the program in a timely way, because if you have to be working a lot on top of doing your PhD program, it'll really slow you down. And so that was important to me. And I would say that that's something to look really carefully at.
Yeah. And I also want to say too, you bring up a great point. Like this financial is not just for nothing. I mean, of course, it's obviously how you're going to pay rent and but it does give you that freedom to complete the program. I do know the other thing that's really important is that many universities also provide some childcare subsidies, of course, healthcare. Those were things that were hard fought by graduate students across different universities. And I remember going to ASA with a newborn one time when I was an advanced graduate student, and Northwestern had paid for a babysitter to be in the hotel so I could go downstairs and present and then attend to the child. And I remember thinking I could not be here doing that unless that support was there. So when you do go visit or ask about programs, please be sure to ask about funding. And to Acosta's point about what Trisha Rose said, somebody had said to me, you're too smart to ever pay for your education again, and I want to see you fully funded. And I think that that's a good rule of thumb is for everybody who's here, make sure that you feel that you start to develop that confidence to know that that is what you're worth. So I wanted to know how did you decide which programs were right for you, and what was your process of researching them? And maybe we'll start with Acosta on this one.
Oh, it broke my mentor's heart that I applied to sociology pro. She was an anthropologist. And
right.
it's funny, like I don't know if I didn't know this when I was applying. So if all the people that are in the webinar today know, but like there are some kind of beefs in academia between different disciplines. And I saw that someone had posted a question about jumping disciplines. And so I'll say as an undergrad, I was a political science and ethnic studies double major. So I hadn't majored in sociology. And I think that as I kind of surveyed grad schools and I looked at what I might be able to study, sociology offered me the greatest breadth of what I could pursue. And that's really what I was looking for, right? I said before that when I wanted to go to graduate school, it was about studying what was interesting to me. And there've been period of time where education has been very interesting to me, where inequality and race and ethnicity has been very interesting to me. The research that I was doing with an anthropologist was on human trafficking and sex work from Latin America to East Asia. These are things that are kind of very disparate depending on how you thread the needle between them, but that could all fall under our disciplinary umbrella in sociology. And that's what I found so beautiful about this discipline. And so what I would tell folks is, we have our arms open to people who come from different backgrounds. So there were folks in my department, or sorry, in my cohort who had an economics background, kind of more traditional demography background, a poli-sci background, linguistics. And we've even had some computer science folks. And so I don't think that you have to have been a sociology undergrad in order to be a sociology kind of PhD student, candidate, and eventually degree holder. And I would say look at what people in that department are working on. That's probably more important because that's driving more of the agenda in what's happening in that department necessarily than what's on even the website. Like if you know
Right.
who's there, like those are the people who are doing
Right.
the work, who are carrying out the research, and that's a stronger signal of what kind of work you'd be able to pursue in that department.
That's beautiful. It's funny. I thought you were going to say, well, these are the schools I applied to. I didn't think about anthro and soc. True confession, I was political science and I switched at the moment of the PhD. So maybe in our next panel, we should talk about that on the application. If you are switching to a different discipline and you're going to soc, how do you frame that so that in recognizable, discernible language to allow the departments to know that you are qualified in soc, that you do understand the driving questions. Yeah, because I guess I did that too. Ananda, tell me about, like, how did you narrow down the list of schools?
Yeah, and by the way, that makes 3 of us who were
Oh my
political
gosh.
grads and then
Who are
switched
you?
to sociology.
Were
I was
you
also political
biology or
science.
something? Or, oh, you were political science. I was going to try to pick the most random field.
Um, and I will say in my cohort as well, I think there was 1 sociology major out of 8 of us. So it's actually was like more common to not have majored in sociology, at least when I was there. So in terms of like which actual schools to apply to, I did a combination of things. I remember actually going one day and sitting down in a cafe on like a Sunday or something and literally looking at like the top ranked sociology departments, which like those rankings,
Yeah,
you
very,
have
very
to be
questionable
skeptical about
sometimes.
them.
Yeah.
But, not knowing much about sociology, like that's what I started with. And I went to the website for each of the top, like, I don't know, 30 programs or something like that. And I actually looked at the faculty pages and just like kind of browsed through it and kind of just like got a vibe. Like, do I think I could see myself learning from these people? Like, are the topics that they're working on interesting to me? Are there people who are working specifically on work and inequality, which was my area of interest? And so then I kind of just for each one, I said like, yes, no, could I see this or not? And of course, I did take into consideration location because I think a lot of times we don't talk about the practicalities of, I'm very close to my family. I wanted to not be too far away from my family. And so that was another really important deciding factor for me of where I applied or not.
Yeah, I think the family piece of it is really big because, it's possible that many, once you get that PhD, you might have to move for the job. And that's going to be one of your most important moves is that you're going to, go from the East Coast to the West Coast or North South. I mean, you don't know what that's going to look like. And so if there is this kind of convenience factor, I mean, for me, I was a Chicagoan, a lifelong Chicagoan, and I got accepted to 2 schools in Chicago. And I got rejected on 1 East Coast and 1 West Coast. I only applied to 4 schools. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm staying in Chicago, which makes this easy for family and, support system and community and those types of things. But that is a really important factor. So in the application process, I know Acosto, you told us a little bit about the failures about this. So what was the most stressful part of I don't want to go too far into what we're going to talk about in the next panel, but just in terms of your application process and driving your decision to select the school once you got there, Ananda, how did that work for you?
So after I got my admittances, is that where you're
Yeah,
going?
yeah.
Yeah, so I applied to a lot of places because I actually had the opposite problem. I didn't think I was going to get in anywhere. And so I probably applied to more places than was good for the amount of time that I had.
I
So
asked how many true confessions here. What do
yeah,
we got?
well, and the other thing is I was also applying to master's programs. So between the two, I applied to probably over 20 programs. And so I ended up getting into quite a few programs. And then it's kind of like fun. You get flown out sometimes to these PhD programs, and they put you like you either stay with a grad student or sometimes you even stay in a hotel and you get to visit for a day and they feed you meals and they're kind of like wooing you. So
Yeah,
that
they're
was,
courting you. Like I was like,
yes,
what is this?
I
Yeah.
was very shocked that they would like pay for my plane ticket to come visit these programs. And so then, when it came down to actually making a decision, the most important things to me were again location and what was going to work for my family and my partner. Um, the other really important thing was whether I felt like I had multiple faculty members at the department who I could see myself working with. So I think that's a really important point that I tell people is don't go somewhere for just one person. You never know if that person is going to stay. You never know if you're going to jive with that person or not. And so I think it's really important to go to a place where you can see yourself having multiple mentors. So that was a key decision point for me. And then the third thing was the finances and picking a place that I felt like, I could make the cost of living work.
Yeah.
So that was what it came down to for me.
I think that key piece, Ananda, is so important. This idea that you're not going for one megastar in a department because, again, life happens. The person can retire, the person can go to another place, and now you're stuck in a department where you don't know who you might want to work with. And I think building the infrastructure in the village is so important. So Acosta, I want to talk to you a little bit about culture, the kind of like intangible things. I wasn't sure if you visited other departments, but when you actually went and did the day at Brown and you made your decision, or any other places, what are the kind of cultural things you were looking for the so-called fit? Ananda, you kind of talked about this, but Acosta, what was that like for you, and what were some signals and things you were looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that Brown does well, that our department does well, is letting current students kind of drive a lot of the visit day and a lot of the recruitment. And that I think gives you insights into what the kind of culture of the department is. You know, what are people happy about? What are they unhappy about? What's working, what's not working? And so as soon as I came in at the visit day at Brown, you know, I got to meet people who were in years. And so here's what I'll say is I think in other places you'll see very active younger cohorts by time, not by age, right? So like people who are in year 1 and 2 will be very active on the admit day and not people who are in year like 5 or 6. But for our admit day at Brown, we had a good number of the people who had been there 4 years, 5 years, 3 years, who were at the events, and you can see kind of talk to where people at different stages of the program were, and you know what they were enjoying and not enjoying. And that can be overwhelming, right? Because you have some people talking about prelims, other people talking about, you know, their master's paper, other people talk. And so but it gives you a great glimpse. And they were building a pretty great department. I mean, I would say, you know, I've been at Brown on and off since the 2000s, right? And from far away, you know, the sociology department wasn't the most exciting place in the world at that point. There were maybe 2 faculty members who I had been really excited about from before. And we've had a kind of whole face makeover, not just in terms of like the symbolic identities of the people who are here, but also the substantive work that they do. Right. And so that also feeds who the students are and who's coming and applying. And so when you kind of get in this room with people and you start hearing about the stuff that they're working on, you know, things like transportation in developing countries in the global south versus like race and ethnicity in education in the US, you know, so like the range was so big, but everybody seemed so excited, and it was very collaborative. You talked about the funding before. You know, there are some departments that up until very recently not only had that like bifurcated system, but it could flip, right? So one horror story that I had heard is like in any given year, you know, in certain cohorts, someone could go from being funded to not funded, and someone from being not funded, not having a stipend, to having a stipend. So it created this very competitive environment in those places that we just don't have here in the same way, thankfully. And so I think we had a really great community that kind of usually draws people in.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful too, because I mean, I think one of the things we talked a lot at the beginning about, getting to steer your own research. But the reality is especially when you're a graduate student, and for many people when they become faculty members, what we do is often very collaborative. We learn collaboratively. We learn statistics in group. There's probably someone who's really good at coding and someone's really good at analysis. I was a great coder. I could fix everybody's code, right? And my other friends, we'd all troubleshoot each other's work. We learned as a community. And I think that that's really important because you want that culture to be really strong. You want it among the faculty, you want it among the students, and it really impacts. The one funny thing that I thought, because Acosta, you brought this up about the graduate students, is at Northwestern, our cohort started recruiting really hard. So we had one fun night. And so it was very clear that we were kind of replicating a fun culture. And I think that that matters because, I think the year my cohort did it, we had a hip hop barbecue night. And so we hosted old school hip hop and we barbecued and it was great. We had so much fun. And a lot of the people that applied and visited, they came because they just had a great time. And one mentor said, these are young years. They should be fun years. And Ananda, you mentioned that a little bit about living in New York City. How did that play out with your cohort? Just the young years, the fun years kind of sentiment.
Yeah, my cohort was amazing in grad school. And that was another big part of my decision is when I got to the visit day, just talking to current students and prospective students. And I didn't want to go somewhere where I felt like I was going to be in competition with the people around me and where it was a really heavily competitive environment. There's enough pressure in grad school, like externally from thinking about what you're going to do for work and figuring out your research. So I wanted to be somewhere where I felt supported by both the faculty and the other students. And then, yeah, I just totally lucked out with having a really supportive cohort, very diverse backgrounds. We had someone who was a DJ, someone who used to be a lawyer, someone who had taught history, and it was international. And so it was just like a really diverse group of people, and we all we're working on different things too. There was some overlap, but we were all kind of like working on different things. And so we were just kind of supporting each other and commiserating throughout grad school. And yeah, I think, having those bonds with your fellow students is so important for having a good experience in grad school. So it worked out really well for me.
My cohort had a DJ too. That's pretty awesome. I feel like every cohort needs a DJ application. Yeah, put that on your application. Just kidding there. So I want to go to one. I'm not going to end with this question, but we're coming to the point where we're Q&A. So if you haven't put your Q&A in, please put your questions in the chat, and Professor Pashevitz will kind of try to get as many. We'll try to all get as many as possible. But getting again, the ultimate goal is to get an academic job. Certainly, there are PhDs that go on to industry jobs and other types of things. But I think it remains to be said, and maybe said again, is that largely the training routes you to an academic job. And that's where most of the support goes. So in your view, how did you handle this idea about the job market? Because so many people talk about how hard it is to be on the job market. And, are there enough jobs? And, getting hired can be very stressful. Ananda, how did you handle that?
Yeah, so this was another misconception that I had about grad school. I didn't know that like most people want to be professors who go to PhD programs, because I had, oh, am I still there? I feel like okay. When I came out of this policy research organization where a lot of people had PhDs, so that was kind of my plan, was to get my PhD and then go back into the nonprofit research world. And so it was interesting seeing like, oh, everyone wants to be a professor. That's really interesting. And that's what the training is for, to be a professor. And so the way that I handled the stress was I didn't think I was going to be a professor. And so I
Did you
didn't
keep
worry.
that idea to yourself, or did you share that idea with faculty members, or did you keep that idea to yourself? I mean,
I kept that like a little bit close to the chest because, I didn't know like how people would think about the fact that I didn't necessarily want to go into academia. I think I told my mentors and, but then, I sort of got socialized into this whole academia thing and realized, okay, there's a lot of awesome things about being a professor. And then, but the way that I handled the stress of the job market is I always had a sort of another plan that I was really excited about as well, which, I mean, I'm not necessarily saying that you should or have to do that, but, I worked at the Census Bureau for full time for my last year of graduate school. And there was a really good chance that I was going to go work for the federal government. And the federal government does hire people who have sociology PhDs. There's nonprofit research organizations, there's industry jobs that all hire sociology PhDs. And so I was also doing my networking and research about those kinds of career paths at the same time that I was learning about the more traditional academic career path. But, it gave me some power then in the applications process because I was able to apply to academic jobs that I was really excited about, and know that I had other options that I was also really excited about. So that was my approach. I'm not saying that that's what most people do, but
I
yeah.
love it. It's very honest. I mean, the other thing is too, I think I was most enamored about being a professor, meaning the teaching aspect of it. And I didn't know that even just to get the teaching job, your research had to be sound. Like you had to be published. It didn't matter Now, of course, how you're evaluated in those teaching focused institutions will be primarily teaching, but the expectation is that you're still a sociologist, that you still have your research interest and that you impart and teach those research interests. So again, it was a little like of a learning curve, very similar, I think, to you, Ananda. And then I just really loved the research so much that I was like, I'm on it. I'm going on this job market and I want to do the best that I can. So Acosta, you are the freshest person that just went on the job market, so you can tell us the stress and the accomplishments of getting such a high prestige postdoc. Can you talk to us a little bit about what's the landscape and how are you managing the stress?
Yeah, well, I mentioned mentors a lot, but also community, right? And so part of it, I think, is intentionally surrounding yourself by greatness, and hope that there's some isomorphism there that you're like starting to catch on what some of the folks do, right? So two of my three committee members who are all stars in their own right, Pashevitz and Lindstrom have these storied careers and have done these things, and so I think watching both the people above you and the people who are along your cohort, right? And so I was fortunate enough that I got what used to be the sociology NSF is now administered by the ASA, but part of getting that was applying once, failing, talking to people who have gotten one before, and then looking at their application materials. And I think as you start doing that more and more throughout your career and you build your community, like I've shared my materials with like 5 or 6 people because the current round of applications going in, right? And so people will reach out to you and kind of being committed to paying that forward. I think is true not just about some of these intermediary steps, but also about the application process itself, right? So I have a close colleague of mine, close friend, Chinyere, who's over at Ohio State. And when I was first going on the job market, I was like, hey, listen, I'm going to go on the job market. Would you be willing to read some of my stuff? And she was like, one, absolutely. Two, here's a version of mine. And three, like, pick up this book, right? Like, you need to read this book if you want to get a job. And so like having a community that you can rely on, both from like your mentors, but then also your like peers, is super helpful at navigating that time period.
Absolutely. And that goes back to the kind of culture, right? The people that you're with, when you choose this, a department, do you feel like you fit in? Are there multiple mentors? Are there multiple cohort members that you jive with? I think sharing that knowledge. Sometimes I joke that the best education, the kind of cultural education that we get that helps us go forward in our careers is in the hallways in the around the water cooler or the coffee shop or whatever, where we all congregate and talk about life and talk about, stress or accomplishments, but it really is sharing that knowledge. Um, so I want to end with one more question, and then we're going to take questions from the audience, which is, what is the best advice that you received about succeeding in grad school? I know that's a big question, but is there something that really helped motivate you or keep you on task? Because it is somewhat of a marathon and it's not a sprint, and you pace yourself and Ananda, was there any bit of advice or truth telling that was given to you that you can pass on to our attendees?
Yeah, I mean, I touched on this earlier, but I was given advice early on to prioritize balance. And I think that has just been so important for me because there is a lot of peaks and valleys in grad school. There's like great moments of accomplishment, and then there's also really, challenging times, and there's times when your work gets rejected, or there's times where your data falls through. I had like something happen in my second year where some of the data I planned to use and I ended up not being able to use. And I really thought about quitting grad school in that moment because it was like, these big plans I had just kind of came crashing down. And so I think it was really what kept me growing through that was having balance and having sources of self-esteem and joy that weren't just tied to the program that I was in. And I think that continues to this day. Now, I'm have this great job. I'm so excited to be here at Brown. But there's ups and downs. There's journal rejections. There's lots of different things that can be good and things that can make you feel not so good about yourself. And so having those sources of joy and self-esteem outside of work and school has been really important for me.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. And similar to some of the advice I got, Acosta.
I think it's two things. One, because I was first generation college student and first generation American, there were a lot of folks, maybe you, the most forceful, which were constantly reminding me that like you deserve to be here. Like, you know, you earned your place here, you deserve to be here. Don't ever question that. And I think once you get in and once you've committed to doing this, like reminding yourself of that. And I think related of how to get through those moments. And I don't want to throw them under the bus, but I feel like a lot of the white male mentors will often use this baseball metaphor. So, so my chair is one of them. But like, it's like, you know, if you're batting 200 or 2,200 in baseball, yeah, you're certainly missing a lot more than you're hitting, but like you're doing great. And that's
Yeah.
kind of like what academia is, right? Like getting ready for this failure. Like you're probably gonna miss 8 times, and then 2 out of those 10 you'll hit, and it'll be great, and you'll keep moving. And so in those moments of failure, kind of taking the lick and then figuring out how can I improve on this, what can I learn from this, and keep going, because you know, as you say, you deserve to be here. So just keep pushing.
I think I also said to you, if someone doesn't see your vision, maybe they don't got vision. So that's the other bit of advice. But I will say, you know, to your point, one of my mentors, John Hagan, I was devastated because I got an honorable mention for NSF, which is a really difficult funding stream to get in a first or second year. It's just really hard. It's you know, for most people, it's not happening. I got an honorable mention, and I was like, oh God, I'm devastated. And he's like, wow, oh my God, that's exceptional. Sounds like an R&R to me, meaning revise and resubmit, meaning they love you. Go for it. Walk through the door of success. I was like, was this man crazy? And then the next year I got flat out rejected. And I go, oh, that honorable mention's looking pretty good right now. You know, I upgraded it on my I was like, yes, an honorable mention. Right. It was this reframing and feeling that, you know, it's not really failure, or really saying, I'm actually that scared to fail. I'm going to keep persisting in spite of it, because maybe it's part of what you have to do, and you will do well in the future. So, okay. So Professor Pashevitz, Josh, can you take us to a couple of the questions?
Sure. Am I on?
Yeah, I think so.
So great to be with y'all. So we have a number of questions about working with faculty. I'm just going to group a couple of them together. So questions are, how close do my interests need to be to a faculty members to make it make sense for me to work with them, both in terms of topics and in terms of methods? How many faculty should I be on the lookout for working with in order to kind of have a productive career in grad school? Do we ever have any faculty who are not taking on students? And this is a big one that we've gotten a lot. Is it normal to sort of reach out to faculty before applying and try to talk to them first?
Yeah. Ananda, you're the newest faculty. Can you take that first question about, you know, how close in research interest would you have to be to work with a student?
Yeah. So I think that, you know, there's a couple different points of time that you might think about this. So one is like when you're writing your application, you know, does it have to be like totally in line with what current faculty are working on? And I would say the answer is no. I think that you, for your application, when you're proposing research ideas, should write about what you're interested in. And hopefully there's some subfield overlap. Like, you know, I was interested in work and inequality, and there were people at NYU who were doing work and inequality, but they didn't have the exact same research questions at all that I had. So I think there, you know, when you're writing your application, write about what you're really excited to research about. And then, you know, when you're deciding between programs, if you are deciding between programs, I think it's more, again, it's more about having like that slate of potential mentors. So you want someone who you can talk to about the substance, who's up on the literature, who can point you in the right directions for what you're working on substantively. I personally had a mentor who was a totally different methods wise. Like I mostly do quantitative work. My mentor was doing all qualitative work, but we had really similar substantive interests. And so that was a great mentor for me. And then I had other mentors who could help me more with the quantitative methods that I was interested in. So I would say that there doesn't have, you should have people who are in the same subfields as you for sure, but it doesn't need to be the same research questions.
And Acosta, you just assembled a committee and defended successfully a dissertation. How do you think about the quote unquote fit between what you do and then what your committee, like the researcher committee does?
So I'll try to hit all of them. I mean, I'll start with that one. One thing I'll say is way more important than alignment between research interests is that your mentors and the faculty that you're working with care about your work and what you're doing. And so they might not always write about the same stuff or study the same stuff, but if they have the time and the bandwidth to kind of hear you out and they're very interested and can give you good feedback, that matters way more. Right. And so I worked for a long time with someone who did not work on anything even remotely close to what I do, but it was because we were able to have that synergy. And so I think that's kind of more important than kind of straight alignment. Now, as far as how many faculty you should engage, I'll say it was a little bit cheesy, but in my first year and a half, I very much made it a point to go to every faculty member's office hours. To the degree that, I mean, you guys might laugh because you know this, but like Carrie Spearin doesn't teach any graduate students, but so I went to her office hours and she was like, "What are you doing here?" And I was like, "Well, I'm new in the department. I just figured I'd get to know people." And so she told me a little bit about her past and her trajectory. And it was really cool. And it was valuable kind of to learn about the department, to learn about the work that she does and her extensive background in survey work and such. So I would say, especially in those early years before you've had to kind of clamp down who you're going to work with, talk to as many people as possible. Like the office hours are there for a reason. Use them, introduce yourself, and that's great. One thing I would take into consideration now, looking back and going hopefully into the next stage of my career after the postdoc, is to think about the stage of the career that faculty members are on. So one thing you'll see is, especially as people are getting right before tenure, like their bandwidth is very limited and they have so many demands and pressures on them. And so, they might be able to be on your committee, but not be your chair. Right. And like those are the things that you'll learn as you're going through graduate school of like, how do I assemble and who do I put where? So the stage of the career of the person can matter. And then the last thing, I would encourage people to reach out to faculty before applying. I would tell them like, look, understand that faculty have a lot of demands, so don't take it personal if they don't respond. I did that before applying, and I'll say I got kind of nasty, snarky response from one department where the person was like, "We don't make it a habit of engaging with prospective students. If you get in, then we can talk." But at Brown, two of the faculty members were very responsive, and I met with them and I talked about the program and shared my interests, and I did end up here. So take that for what it's worth about reaching out to faculty.
Yeah, I feel like I've had trouble managing the demand because, the demand from students emailing me. I actually get high school students emailing me right now. I'm like, I had to it's too much. I couldn't do it all. But I try to respond as much as I can. And then certainly once you get the admissions list, I'm talking to everybody. I want to make sure that it's a good fit for them. They get all the information they need. And I think that that's important. I was just going to share one little anecdote because Acosta reminded me. I had proposed a dissertation and then changed my topic while I wrote my dissertation. So that was crazy. But I invited a wonderful professor named Bob Nelson, and he was the head of the American Bar Foundation at the time. And he said, "I would say yes to you, but right now I'm so overwhelmed in this leadership role that I'd love to be on your committee. I just cannot chair it. Because if you fail, that's on me. I am responsible for your success. It's the chair that spearheads you. Really it's your ideas, but it's my mentorship and I was like, what a generous, I was a little disappointed, but he didn't say no. He was just being honest with me. And I was like, what a generous way of saying no in a way that protected my trajectory. And then my mentor at the time was like not an ego-centric person. And he just said, "Oh, I'll do it no matter what." And so that is the most, if you can build that village, whether it's going to office hours, et cetera, then that felt like a good, that's how you get to that point and then hopefully have a very easygoing time, getting that committee together. Josh, did we hit all those questions? Because there's like 4 of them.
I think so. And then I think to clarify, the expectation is that all of us are accepting graduate students at all times, right? Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. Amusing follow-up, are the panelists accepting or currently working with new students? You all?
Yeah, I would be. And Ananda, are you working with new students?
Yeah, I have one of the first year PhD students. I'm like the sort of primary advisor, assigned advisor for a student from the first year cohort. And then I've also been working with a student in the second year cohort, and also informally interacting with other students. I'm on a dissertation committee. So yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, I didn't think I was going to go into academia. A big draw for me to actually end up in academia is I love teaching and mentoring. And I think that's true of everyone here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So then we have some follow-up questions about career trajectories, sort of other than becoming a professor. I was wondering if we could maybe talk a little bit more about that. So this was asked as, can you give some examples of what graduates do sort of when they come out of the department, and what kind of career options could I have with a sociology PhD, sort of other than becoming a professor?
So,
Ananda, you had some, oh, I'm so sorry, Costa. Do you want to start or?
well, yeah, I was gonna say, like, I have a few friends, or either from my cohorts above or below, that have gone into some of this, and so, kind of similar to what Ananda mentioned before, I think think tanks or policy institutes are common landing sites for folks from our department. The Census Bureau has hired a few PhDs from our department in recent years. I have a friend who works in consulting now. There was an era where DEI initiative is really big in consulting, and as she finished her PhD, got a really nice fellowship where they were trying to bring people from academia into the finance world to understand how they could better serve historically and contemporarily underserved communities. One thing I'll say about my current role that's really exciting as a postdoc at this Annenberg Institute is that it's allowing me to kind of see both sides of, we have a group of faculty that's very academia focused and kind of traditional, but then another side of faculty that or researchers that do a lot more kind of policy briefs and report based work. And so this giving me an opportunity to see those two sides and to determine kind of how I'll take my career going forward.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. Yeah, I know people who have gone into government jobs, both like at Census Bureau as well. I know someone who went to work for the city of New York after grad school. I know someone who went to work for a tech firm in sort of like user experience. They hire sociologists sometimes. I will say like that the training that you receive will be primarily oriented towards getting you a job at like an R1 research-oriented university. But there's lots of other paths that people do take, both within and outside of academia. So, within academia, people also go work for community colleges or more teaching-focused schools that might not have graduate programs. So there is heterogeneity in the different paths that people take. I think that if you're aiming for one of those other paths, though, you just have to be more intentional about networking and learning about those paths, because your faculty members all work at R1 universities, and so that's what they know. And it's not that they don't want to be helpful in other ways, but that's primarily what their experience is about.
I would say the other thing is that, so what I tried to do, I did work in industry beforehand. I worked in advertising for Disney and Hallmark and Procter and Gamble. And so I actually heavied up on things that I knew would be attractive to the industry, meaning I learned a lot about cultural theory, a lot about organizational theory. And so I knew that I could take those subfields of sociology and make them marketable and translatable to places where you could work, like Facebook, like going through data at Netflix. Like they just released the Netflix data right now, and people are trying to understand what that means culturally about what people watch and how many hours they watch it, right? Like I'm just like, I love to hang out in that data for a while. And think about the cost and how it shapes culture. So that actually is another route in. It's not like you're watering down the kind of rigor of what you know about sociology and your ability to contribute, but there are areas that are really attractive to the business community, the legal community, the policy arena. And so trying to get your hands on that coursework that will really, in some ways be convincing to, Apple or to some other industry is something you might want to think up beforehand, like really go into it with that conscious steering and not do it at the last minute.
And then we have a bunch of questions about the centers on campus, which kind of relates to what Acosta was saying. So questions like, I'm really interested in what the Watson Institute is doing or the Pop Research Center is doing, the Environmental Institute. Will I have a chance to work with those centers as a sociology PhD student? And do I have to apply to them separately? Like, is there a special thing that I need to do in order to have those collaborations?
Maybe Acosta knows this one, right? Because
Yeah.
experience.
Strong yes and yes. So what I would say is, anywhere that you go, I know Brown obviously the best, but look at what these opportunities may be. And so at Brown, because we have the Watson, because we have the Annenberg, because we have the PSDC, because we have IBIS, these places also have their own pot of resources. And so you come in kind of with the Brown standard package, but Watson does, public and global affairs. And so if you're interested in development, broadly speaking, I think we also have an Africa initiative now. So within those two research interests, you could apply to have a fellowship that actually covers what would be usually your fellowship stipend payment. And so instead of being a TA or an RA, you might have more time to focus on the interdisciplinarity of your research interests, take classes with folks in econ, poli-sci, anthro, and get some extra training in that field. Same thing with the PSCC. If you're more interested in demography, they have their fellowship that's funded through the NIH that will provide you more demography-centered training and allow you to develop your research interests across their interdisciplinary group. And the same thing with IBIS. I think Annenberg is working on developing something similar for education. And so as a sociology student, you can take classes in some of the institutes and centers that host some, but then there are these other opportunities. Another one that I can't speak highly enough of, we have the Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity in America that used to be led by Tricia Rose and is now led by our very own Prudence Carter, former president, the American Sociological Association. And they had this amazing interdisciplinary fellowship that I got to participate in where every year they take 2 senior faculty, 2 junior faculty, 2 postdocs, and 2 graduate students. And we were in a seminar together for a semester. So I got to be with Prudence. Prudence was on her sabbatical year that year. And so I got to kind of learn from her and be in a space where it was, we were treated as equals, and I got to learn so much from her and from some of the other faculty members. So there's amazing opportunities across campus. You kind of just have to go out and look for them. And some of that comes from the networking we've talked about, where talk to other graduate students, right? See what they're doing, see what some of the opportunities are and pursue them.
And one other thing to add what Acosta was saying, I think one thing about Brown is that these centers are really a beautiful form of just intellectual vibrancy and life on campus. And so, I'm a fellow at the Center for Slavery and Justice, which is now called the Ruth Simmons Center. And we're bringing in Robin Bernstein, who is an American Studies professor at Harvard, a trained historian, but she looks at culture of race and how we understand innocence and guilt and childhood and how those things get racialized. And so if you're a grad student interested in race, you should be in that seminar. You should sign up to meet this professor. Those become the networks that cultivate your job market access. And you just learn from these faculty. So the visiting scholars also from the centers really add a vibrancy to your education.
And I'll just add that I think you can get great research ideas from exploring other parts of the university and other disciplines and other classes. And I know the idea for my dissertation came from taking a class in a different department and then sort of merging that with what I was learning in my sociology classes. And so I think, yeah, this is a great way to develop research ideas too.
Next question is about teaching. So question is, what if I've never taught before? I've never stood in front of a room of people and tried to teach something. What kind of support will you offer? Do I sort of get taught how to teach as part of the grad school experience? I don't know, Nicole, maybe you want to take that one or?
Well, okay. So
Yeah.
one of the things I have all my students do is everybody has to lead a seminar for each week. So, somebody gets week 1, somebody gets, and they're the discussion leaders. So right from the beginning, your education, and at least in my classes, and I do teach a core class in qualitative methods, and I teach cultural theory and methods, which is one of our preliminary exam areas. But you're in some ways being forced to think about, how would I teach this? Not just learn it. How would I explain it to others? What questions would I ask to engage discussion? And it should be a safe environment in which you can kind of cultivate that new mindset. I mean, again, it's a shift from being an undergrad and kind of having knowledge passively, put on you, to actually participating in the knowledge creation that can, generate discussion, but also generate research ideas for other people or for yourself. So that's how I do it in the classroom. Acosta, do you have any insights? Just graduate?
Yeah. So I'll say a few things. I mean, one, historically speaking, universities and departments have not done the best job at training people to teach. I mean, the focus has been to create research, and I think sometimes prioritized to the detriment of instruction. I think recognizing that at Brown, we have the Sheridan Center for Teaching that offers a certificate course that helps graduate students kind of hone some of their teaching skills. The other thing I'd say is that our department has really strong teaching faculty. I mean, I was an assistant principal and I evaluated teachers at the K-12 level for a long time, and would often pull my teeth trying to get people to work on their craft. And I'll say that, like, I think very highly of the instruction that is provided by our faculty, and imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. So thinking about how you can take some of those pieces and the way that they break a lesson down and sit for, how do people use a 3-hour block? 3 hours is a long time. And your classes, your graduate seminars are often that long. And so watching how different professors use that time, I think, and doing so intentionally, not just as like a consumer or receiver of that knowledge, but as an aspiring user of that knowledge and as an aspiring teacher, I think is very important. Finally, I'll say that we do have a requirement that you do teach at least one semester. So even folks who are fully funded from the outside and try to come in and say kind of buy their way out, you will have to TA or have some kind of fulfill a teaching requirement, I believe, by the end of your 3rd year. I know Betsy will keep me honest on that if I mess that up. And so, that's an opportunity often if you haven't quote unquote had to teach, to find all right, yeah. So Betsy says I am correct. So by the end of your 3rd year, you would have had to fulfill this teaching requirement. You can approach a faculty member and ask them if you can fulfill your requirement with them. And faculty are very open to that opportunity. I did mine with John Logan. And so I was able to kind of serve informally as his TA because I needed to fulfill that requirement by that deadline. And it was a great experience. I very much enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
Josh.
Nicole.
I was just going to say, like, we think of TAing as kind of earning your keep, meaning your stipend is often associated with TAing. But one of the things is when I have TAs, they're not just graders, they're learning. Here's the logic of how I organize this class. Here's how we should grade it and grade equitably. Let's do this together, right? So here's how I'm going to create a rubric and I'm going to post it before, not after it's graded, right? I want to reduce the amount of stress on the students, but also their success. All those things become really important because as UTA, at least in my experience, I could kind of start building a resume on my CV of classes I can teach when I go onto the job market. So you have to think of the TAing as not just the work, but also, to me, the apprenticeship part of learning how to be a teacher, or when you have that teaching hat on.
Yeah, generally it's kind of like a smooth on-ramp, right? Where you go from TAing to doing your own discussion sections. It's not like we just throw you in front of your own course, right?
Right.
Yeah. Ananda, were you gonna say
Yeah,
something?
no, I totally agree with that. I think, my experience of TAing was what made me realize that I loved teaching. I TA'd for Sarah Cowan and Ann Morning at NYU, both like fabulous instructors. And so I learned so much from seeing how they did it and then also having to lead my own sections. But I'll echo Acosta's point that I think in a lot of programs, there isn't a lot of requirements to learn how to teach. And so, that's something that I was proactive about. I see other people being proactive about things like the Sheridan Center Teaching Certificate. We had something like that at NYU too. And so I think that you kind of, there should, I would argue there should be even more preparation for teaching. You know, I'm a new professor and I'm just kind of like figuring it out as I go. I think I'm doing okay. But so, you know, you have to be a little bit proactive about that. But I agree, like through the seminars and through TAing, you do get a lot of that help.
So then we have some questions about the graduate experience, about how many other students would be in my graduate cohort. What are relationships between people like? Do you work together on doing notes for reading? How many people will have the same interests as me? Acosta, maybe you want to start this one and then we can kind of.
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
so the Brown program shoots for a cohort size of 10. That's their target.
Yeah.
It fluctuates, and so the year before I got here, the cohort was 5. That year they had a low yield, and then my year we started off at 14, and so it kind of swung in the other direction. It was actually 15, one person deferred for a year. So it can swing a bit. What I would say, which took a little bit of a hit during the pandemic, but having as much kind of horizontal as vertical integration, right? So there are going to be students, some of my closest friends are people who are 1 or 2 years, 3 years, even sometimes ahead of me in the program. And so finding interests both intellectually, right? Like these are people who sometimes do work that I do within my cohort or in other cohorts, but also socially, right? So, I was at the GCB every Friday at 4 o'clock. It now opens at 5 after the pandemic. But there was a group of us from the department that were like that. And then there were folks who were more tea-centered, and they would have tea every week and go for a walk, right? Like I think there are enough people at 10 on average per cohort, but then having, 4 to or having 5 to a little extra change cohorts active at a time, that you can find a group, a core that's into whatever you're into intellectually or socially, and then you can kind of build your community from there.
Yeah. Was that the experience you all had in grad school as well, or?
Yeah, I would say similar. So as I mentioned, I got along really well with my cohort, but I also developed friendships with people in other cohorts for sure. And it was a very lively community in general. I would say that, there's a lot of diversity and research interests in a lot of these programs. And so, I think that's a good thing. Like, again, like I also chose sociology because it's a big tent. Like I have a lot of different interests. It's fun to be talking to people who are working on different things than you, but are sort of thinking about it in the same kinds of ways and working through similar kinds of methods or theories or things like that. So I actually think that's a good thing that there's so much diversity in what people are working on.
I think the other thing, and I don't know if you agree with me on this one, Josh, but like, I feel like we were less unified by our empirical topics, meaning there weren't a ton of people in my cohort that studied criminal justice or courts like me. That didn't exist. But we were all cultural sociologists. So there were, someone was studying the talented 10th, and someone was studying, kind of racist mascots, like the use of Native American mascots, and someone was studying reading and books. And so we all were talking about culture, but everybody had a different, unique, kind of empirical site of investigation. And that made it all the more interesting. And one of my friends was Michaela DeSoucy, and she studied foie gras.
Right.
And we both on the same year won the culture prize for our books. And we were just like we were posing, and we had different filters, we were having a blast because we were both friends, but also we were both, kind of raised in a program that had this kind of interest. And I think Brown is very much like that. A lot of us have interest in Du Boisian scholarship. A lot of us have education scholarship, race and racism, and those become the unifying, like, common language, if you will, that then allows us to kind of talk, even though we're looking at different sites of investigation.
Yeah, totally. Then the final question is about Providence. So what kind of place is Providence? Is it diverse? Are there things to do? How easy is it to have like a well-rounded life in Providence and Rhode Island?
I feel like Acosta needs to. I mean,
Rhode
Island Senator
I feel like I've been turning
Acosta.
it to him a lot. So yeah.
So I've definitely been here the longest.
Yeah.
I've been here on and off since 07. I mean, look, what I would say, we talked a lot about the financial kind of dimension of these decisions, and I don't know, Doc, if we have the highest stipend, but we certainly have probably the highest bang for your buck.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Both regionally and around the country, right? And so like the affordability of the greater Providence area is really great. The food scene is really great. I'm a big Boston hater. Like I just like don't enjoy hanging out in Boston socially. Like I grew up in the South in Miami-Dade County, which is not really the South, but it's definitely different from this. And so the racism tastes differently in Boston than it does for me in
Yeah.
other places. And so like I think Providence offers a nice kind of relief from that northeastern stuff. For me, it was very important to be around people that look like me, and so I live in Central Falls, which is about 15 minutes away from Providence. We are the majority minority quote unquote community, so we have a Latino majority in the city and on the city council and local politics, and so I'm able to kind of live a separate but still close by life to Providence. I think if you wanted to live in Providence proper and didn't want to have a car or any of that obligation, you can do that. So there are a lot of people who can find a way to get by. So if you care about public transportation through Brown, you'll have access to all the bus routes for free as part of your Brown ID, and that's really great. And there's certainly a good cultural hub in the city. There's a strong arts community. RISD is right next to Brown, and it's a world-class arts institution. And so there's just a lot of activity and things going on that for somebody who's a student, who's a grad student, you can do a lot. But I would also encourage people to get a little bit out of Providence. Like I said, like I was a big fan of Central Falls. Pawtucket is also nearby, the birthplace, the American Industrial Revolution. So there's a lot of kind of like old history and cool things to do. And you're very close to other places, right? So you're just a train ride, a bus ride from New York, from Boston, if you wanted to go there. You're pretty close to Philly. So the Eastern Sociological Society is a conference that I encourage a lot of early career students to go to because it's kind of like a low threshold to get in, but it's always in a city that's close by. It's a lot of fun and you get to know stuff. So close to DC, close to Philly, close to New York. It's a great time and it's very affordable.
Yeah.
I was just going to say nature. I grew up in, I was in two major cities in Chicago and Philadelphia, and there was something quite exhausting about the day-to-day hustle and bustle and being on the trains. And like, I was just, by the time you shut the door at the end of the day, you're just tired, right? You've walked miles upon miles. And there's something about the loveliness of Providence and Brown, the campus, that allows a sense of peace. And that's the one thing I love. And so you'll notice that a lot of the state parks, you actually see an enormously diverse amount of people, Black and brown people, just enjoying nature. And that to me is like a new idea. I didn't think that nature would be for me. So I just want to put that out there. Like coming here, you just have fishing and water and ocean and hiking. And I mean, to me, that's a whole new world. Ananda, you're new to Providence. Do you have any little insights or?
Yeah, I agree with what both of you said. I've only been here a year so far, but I'm really enjoying it. And I think it's really lovely place, very nice to live here, close to other cities. I have friends in nearby cities around here. It's very easy for me to get back home. I'm from the East Coast. So you've got that access to other places, but being here, yes, it's definitely more affordable than New York, where I was coming from. And but there's still like lots to do. And so I think it's great. I'm enjoying it a lot so far.
Yeah, I would just add that the region is great. This is something you don't appreciate if you're from a different part of the country. So like I grew up in Austin, Texas, and it takes almost like 5 hours to get to Dallas, right? Maybe 4. You can get to Montreal in 5 hours from Providence, right? So it's like New England is small. You can get everywhere really quickly. I did want to say one more thing before we sign off. A number of people had questions about a fee waiver. Do we have a fee waiver for the application based on financial need? The answer is that we do. There's a section of the application that will ask you for details if you're requesting a fee waiver, and that would be evaluated by the graduate school on a case-by-case basis.
Awesome. And I also saw in the Q&A that we had a lot of amazing questions about applications and shaping the personal statement and those types of things. And I just want to promise everyone to please come back for our second panel, which is on November 18th. The marketing will start very very soon to get you engaged. So on November 18th, we will reconvene and we will talk about specifics of, how to apply. What is the insider's guide to the application process? And we'll take you into that process and hopefully give you those tips. And Josh will be leading that panel. And I just want to thank everybody. I first want to thank our panelists. So Ananda and Acosta, thank you so much for imparting all this wisdom and this truth telling. And it's been lovely to spend this time with you both. Thank you so much to those who organized it. Betsy Vale is one of our, I don't want to say an unsung hero because I thank her all the time, but she is really a point of contact for all graduate students. So she is a wonderful asset to our department and really helps all our graduate students understand all the ins and outs of what it takes to succeed and get through bureaucracy and funding, et cetera. And she was instrumental to helping facilitate this as well as Josh. It's been truly a collaborative effort. Thank you all for attending and have a wonderful night. Thank you.